City Matters.
Hello, and thank you for joining me today. I'm your host, Rich Acretelli, and on today's episode of The Fog of War and Humanity here on hmTV, my special guest is Renee Pardo. Will join me for a conversation about her family's history, the Holocaust, and their time here in the United States. Renee, here we go. Where did you grow up as a kid, and what were some of the things that you like to do?
Hi, Rich. So I was born like a lot of Jewish kids. I was born in 1968 in Brooklyn, New York. I have no memory of this time because my parents were always having that. My mom was born and raised in Brooklyn. My father born in Greece. They were always having that fight about country city. So they moved out to, when I was a baby, to the East End of Long Island. So I lived in East Hampton in the Springs in the early 70s up until the time I was 7 years old. And then it was a tough economic time. My dad had a pizza store, and he sold pizza.
How did he get into making pizza?
I think he just knew how to do a lot of different things and thought it would be a good business and studied it enough to learn how to do it.
And was there any one thing that you could recall from East Hampton?
Oh my gosh, I recall so much. So there is out there now in Bridgehampton, there's a big shopping center, and that's where my father's store was. I think now it used to have a Grant's in it. It became, later when we moved, I heard a Caldor or something else, and then became Kmart. Now it's gone. Just a few stores over is where my dad's pizza store was. In the back, I used to ride my big wheel when I was forced to stay there all day.
Yeah, you find something to do.
So
right?
I remember lots, and I went to kindergarten, first grade, second grade there. Because of Facebook, I found some of my old classmates, but it was 1976 when he felt that he couldn't continue to make a living, was only making money in the summer. And that's when they ended up moving with a U-Haul to Texas. And I grew up the rest of my life in Texas. In Houston, went to school in Austin, University of Texas at Austin, and went to law school. And eventually moved here back sort of in a way coincidentally because of the person that I married and what was going on in our lives. But I moved back here in 97.
Wow.
The rest of the time I've been here. So those are the two places I've really lived in my life, is Texas and New York.
Now, was education, your parents, they really wanted you to get an education, to earn one, huh?
Oh my gosh, that's all I ever heard growing up. Both of them, for different reasons, were sort of denied a further education. And I knew from the time I was a little girl that I was going to college. There was not going to be a discussion.
And that was part of the immigrant experience,
Absolutely.
right?
Absolutely. We did all this. We got you here. You're going to do better. You're going to be smart. You're going to go to college.
Okay. Is there any one part of your education that your parents were proud of?
Oh my gosh, sure. So I went to law school, and I think a lot of people make a decision to go to law school for different reasons, and some people make a decision because they don't really know what else to do. That wasn't me. I didn't know really what lawyers did. I didn't have lawyers in my family, but what I was told was you like to argue, you like to debate. My father, who sounded a lot like Ricky Ricardo, if you watched I Love Lucy, he had that kind of accent. Don't be dummy like me. You have big mouth. Go to school. I mean, I was told you should go to law school. And so because I was told that, I used to think about it a lot. Government and politics was something that interested me. And that's kind of the way I ended up that way.
What kind of law do you practice today?
So the majority of my career, I was a prosecutor or a county attorney. Child abuse cases, I prosecuted major crime cases. And then in family court as a county attorney, I handled all of those types of abuse cases from that end. But now, just for the last couple of years, I'm in private practice. So I have my own office. I do criminal defense. I do a lot of Title IX defense of young students. And then also the other business that I love and that I do is I coach other attorneys.
Wow. So you mentored them, huh? You have many fine experiences, and you've seen some
Exactly.
interesting and some alarming things. And
I think, what I focus on really is helping attorneys that kind of want to maybe have more confidence in the courtroom or have anxiety or just want to make lawyering, which can be so stressful, feel better. I got coaching late in my career, not the normal things about how to be in the courtroom. I do speak on that, about trial technique, and I love that. But what I coach on really is the mindset to help you kind of get out of that fight or flight that sometimes as attorneys with the kind of heavy matters we deal with, you could sort of get stuck in. And I know I did.
yeah.
So that's what I love to do.
Okay. So you provide really a beneficial service
I hope
to
so.
a lot of lawyers
Yep.
coming up and kind of getting their feet wet.
Yeah,
And
and
establishing
even-
some confidence for them as well.
I love doing that, but honestly, the majority of my private clients that I have are oftentimes my age or want to make a transition. They're afraid. What else could they do? So I speak a lot about that sort of thing.
Okay, good. Now, I know that you're very close with your family, and you have a very interesting, to say the least, family history and experiences over in Europe and over here in America. Can you speak about your family before World War II began, or before World War II reached their area of
Sure,
Greece?
absolutely. So, and also just to know, I'm close, but they're gone. So, I'm 56, and I don't mind saying that. I was born at the end of 1968, right? But I lost my mother when I have two children, 25 and 21. I lost my mom when she was, when my oldest son was just 2. So she was only 67. And my father was 63 when he died. And that was my last week of law school. So they've been gone a long time. So their history and their story is important to me because my kids never got to know them, unfortunately. But to answer your question, what was their life like? So my father's side of the family, my dad considered himself, when he was born in 1929, Greek. He was born in a small town close to the border of Yugoslavia and Turkey called Florina, Florina. And it was basically a small, and I've been there, and it's a small mountainous community where there were butcher shops and bakeries, and that's really what life was like for them. And the people that lived there, the Spanish Jews, they were Spanish Jews in the sense that they had been there since the Inquisition. So when everybody's celebrating, what happened at Columbus in 1492, for my family, that was the edict. That was when the Jews were expelled from Spain.
They were forced out.
But again, that was 1492. And there was an area of the world, which was this area, which wasn't always Greece. Sometimes, it was Greece and Turkey, the Ottoman Empire.
Yeah, it changed hands.
Right. And that is when the term Sephardic became something, because that's when those Spanish Jews speaking Spanish moved to this area and they flourished in various areas. In Turkey, they flourished, right? So, and understand the border, because my mother's family settled in an area called Monastir, which was Turkey. But there's only like 60 to 90 miles between that area of what's now Greece and now Turkey. Okay. So they settled in the Ottoman Empire. But by the time my father was born in 29 in Greece, like I'm an American and always he thought he was Greek. Yes, their language that they spoke at home, just like Jews often speak Yiddish here. That was not my family. They spoke Ladino. And that was kind of the amalgamation of Spanish, that from Spain, and then because they were forced to live in Greece and Turkey, it had the components of those languages too, and Portugal. It was the Jews from Portugal also that were expelled. So it was this mixture. So that was our Yiddish, was Ladino. And they all lived there. And the Greeks accepted them. At least this is what my family tells me. They were part of that culture.
Yeah, they were Greeks first, and their religion was second. So
yeah, I mean, they were.
It's no different here in the United States.
Served in their armies, were part of whatever war. My mom's family, my mom was born in Brooklyn, in Monastir, that large Jewish community, which was large and Jewish prior to World War II. Same thing. There's pictures of relatives I have in their Turkish hats, right? They consider themselves just the way we do today. And then it all changed.
Now, what made it change for your family and for other Jews in the area?
So back to Greece and Florida, my father, and also I learned a lot from my mother because he would talk to her about his experience and the rest of my family members. It started when my father, so again, born in 1929, when Greece was really invaded, like Germany invaded in 1941, right? And occupied. And things didn't get horrible right away.
Italy tried, but
Right.
did they reach the extent of where your family was? Because they were kind of almost out of the way.
My
right?
understanding is, so it was like 1940 that Italy invades Greece, right? I believe that's it. And Greece pushed back.
Pushed back. Yeah.
My father's family thought they were Greek, right? But by April of 1941, Greece was occupied by Germans, Italians, and Bulgarians, right? That was through like 1944.
And your dad was about 12 years old at the. He was
He was born in 19. Right, exactly.
Right.
And it was at that time that he recalled being in school and first being told, you don't go to school anymore. Or I think they started with like, they didn't get a complete education. They could go somewhat, but he wasn't. Then he would tell me the story. I think it made a big impression on him. We weren't allowed to have bicycles because his bike was taken and given to Christian families. And that is when there was a difference, where neighbors treated them differently.
Cutting the basics out of their regular life.
Right, but they felt still with no idea of what was coming, and why? We're Greek. And it may be a bad regime, but not that what would end up happening. And you have to understand the majority of Jews, same background, Sephardic Jews weren't living, this was a very rural area. They were living not so far away, but in that day it was far Salonika, or sometimes you hear Saloniki. That is where much of my family also was, more extended family. My dad was one of 8 siblings, so it was a big family. So, and he was the second to youngest. And I have a picture of like parts of them if you want to see.
Yeah, if you'd like to show it.
Yeah, so this picture, my dad, this is before all of that. This picture I have, I don't know if you can see here.
Yeah, you can see it.
Okay, so this picture here, my father is actually on the floor. That's him, right? And getting married is his older sister, Sarah Cohen, who her name became Cohen many years later. But this man here who married her was not Cohen. And this picture, which is so interesting, this is my grandmother, so my father's mother and my grandfather. And this is the actual picture. It's got some cardboard underneath it, and there's little X's that someone drew on them. The reason for the X's is they took this professional photo.
Was your dad the one on the right there?
This is my father
on
right
the left
here.
there.
Yeah.
Wow.
So, and these are my uncles. So this is the one younger brother that he had. This is his older brother, who I did meet once. This is Menachem, who lived in Israel eventually. And this isn't all of the family. This is another aunt. But what's so interesting, the little X's are because they use this photo to make other photos. Like I have a photo of my grandmother and grandfather that is half photo and half colored in. Like you could actually rub off some of the color. And that's how they made colored photos. So interesting. But that is my father.
That picture taken in their hometown?
Yes. So this was done in Florida. And then Sarah moved to Saloniki, to Salonika. With her husband. And that's where she was when the war started. And these are my grandparents. And like I said, there were more children than this. This is another one of my aunts. And I believe this is another one of my aunts. And this is the groom's parents. Like I don't even know their names. But yeah, so that was their life. And I don't know where everybody else was. So interesting, right? And these photos, I didn't grow up with them out. I learned these stories, and even moving from Brooklyn to Long Island to Texas, I knew these were like in a suitcase somewhere. I had to kind of learn the stories. Yeah, it's sort of interesting, and that has a lot to do with how my parents were raising us, and just sometimes a lot of things were done in a temporary nature and ended up staying that way our whole lives, just because of the way my parents were. And they were wonderful parents in many ways, but they definitely were scarred from their experiences.
So where they lived, by the time the Germans got to their town, outside of some of the islands, they got there probably on the later end
They did.
of where the Germans were at in Europe and in Greece itself.
Correct. And it was hard for the Germans to know exactly where they were and who was who. They didn't understand a lot of that. They were used to names like Goldstein and Rubenfeld and Rosenfeld, and they weren't used to names like Pardo. So they had to find records to see who was Jewish and who wasn't. And it was difficult. And they relied on Greek citizens to identify.
Right?
Yeah. And, my father had one opinion about this. If you talk to my aunt, even Aunt Sarah, and my Aunt Louise, who was married to, she only recently died. And she was married to this person, my father's brother. So my uncle David. So she would even say, well, the Greeks were scared. And she was Greek through and through. And she said they were scared. They didn't know. To my father, if you asked about it, they hated us. They were cowards.
Yeah, they pointed us out.
Correct. And so it's so interesting depending on someone's personality and, of course, also their own experience, they have very different opinions about people who were collaborators or who lived there.
Here were good people. They fight in the military. They pay taxes.
Oh, yes.
They do everything that every other group of Greeks had done and will be doing. And they end up getting hurt, not only by the Germans, but by their own people.
Which was the biggest betrayal to my father. It really defined his personality. And when I finally understood that, explained so much of how I was raised and his lack of trust in humanity.
Yeah. Now, you hear like that the groups they always say sooner or later had heard about the rumors about the camps and the treatment and, not wanting to be caught or be sent in these areas. Did the Greeks eventually know about this, or the Greeks in this area, the Greek Jews in this area, have any idea that this stuff was going on?
You mean at the time?
At the time there.
So yes, but again, in the same way, I guess, that my father's family learned, depending on where they lived. So they certainly didn't have instantaneous knowledge, right? My father and his family, I do know this part very well, they really didn't know the extent of what was happening, even in a place as close as Salonika or Rhodes, right?
Yeah.
There was 90% of that population was Jewish. And remember, they're not just like recent immigrants. They'd been there for hundreds of years, right? So it's not like, it's a new group that's different.
Just the number 1492 is a huge number in terms of being there.
And the fact that this language, Ladino, exists and had all these components to it is because they'd been living in that area for so long, right? So no, but I mean, in my own family story, my Aunt Sarah, who was such a central part of everything, and it was sort of, I think, safer for my father to talk about her. And so I know more about her story even than his in some respects. But she is credited with, because she was living in Salonika with this man, she is credited with coming to Florina. Like it was this huge journey, right? You could do it by car easily, but then she had to use a horse or a pony. That's the story.
Was there mountains or anything like that in that part of Greece?
Yeah, Florina is very mountainous. And I got to visit it in 1985 when I was 17 with my father. And now I also appreciate how special that trip was. But she's credited with coming from Salonika to Florina to tell them, you're going to hear news. If you hear news about being, coming to the town square, because that's what they used to do. Don't go. She let them know what was doing, but she returned home to go be with her husband. And the story is that Sarah, and this is what she's told when she's given her testimony, they got away with, in Salonika for some time, pretending not to be Jewish until they were identified. And her husband was shot in Salonika. Never went to a camp because he was shot and killed there. And when Salonika was really, when they rounded everybody up to get into the cattle cars, she was part of that. And yes, towards more close to the end of the war, thank goodness. But she had, my understanding is, the worst experience of the family in the sense that she went to Auschwitz. She ended up being one of the people that survived experiments being done on her. She was never able, as I knew her, as my aunt, to have children. I understand that her ovaries were removed, and she was in horrible shape. Her husband had been killed, and she was left for dead, but she did survive.
How long did she live for? What was the age that she passed away?
Okay, so she didn't die until her 80s,
Wow.
I believe late 80s. And by that time, it was already, I believe, around 98, 99. I had already moved to New York as an adult person. Unfortunately, she had Alzheimer's or dementia. And this woman who was so brave and who really never spoke about what happened to her. Everybody else talked about what happened to her.
Yeah, total horrifying conditions. Yeah.
She never spoke. She ended up with that dementia that really put her back in 1945, because I recall going to synagogue with her in Brooklyn, right? And her saying at some point, I think it was somebody's bat mitzvah or bar mitzvah in my family, and she said, she showed her numbers, said, look what they did to me. And they're coming, and other older relatives at the time would be annoyed with her, like, no, stop that. We're not talking, this is happy.
So she was caught in that early
she ended up
time period.
Correct. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So when I heard that she finally had passed, now, understand at that point, she survived. My father passed away before her. My mom, not long after. We were still glad to hear that she had passed at that point, so that she could be free. She did live a great life in the United States with plastic on the furniture in Brooklyn.
Yeah, like a lot of other people. Yeah.
But that couch was in great shape, let me tell you.
For a long period of time.
Right. But she remarried an American, Jacob Cohen. That's how she became Sarah Cohen. And she's just, the fact that she survived and did all of this and basically was sort of like a grandma to a lot of us was a wonderful gift to give. She never got to meet my children, but, I'm so glad that I know her story.
Now let's just take a look at the geography of the Holocaust real quick, right? Your family is really in the corner of Europe, because in that little spot, you have the Turkish side, and then most of Turkey itself is in Asia. The Holocaust goes from there well into Europe, and then all the way towards like the Franco-Spanish border.
Yes.
And almost within sight of England. And the Germans were just totally motivated to get their hands on every type of Jewish person,
Correct.
Group, background, ethnic background as well.
Correct.
And
it did not matter.
It did not matter.
The final solution, and I think you and I spoke about this a little, it worked. Hitler's plan it worked for so many communities and cultures. We were not one culture. It's important to me when I tell people that talk about the Jewish experience, and I understand, especially in this country, it's very easy to be just in the mindset that Jews are all named Rosenfeld and Goldstein and that this Eastern European experience, which is huge because of the numbers, the sheer numbers of people, most of them came from there. But that is not to negate that there were thousands upon thousands and millions.
Europe was a huge area.
Correct.
Right?
And the entirety of that culture is disappeared or mostly disappeared. Now, because of the internet, Ladino has really been saved. There's wonderful professors now in centers for Sephardic study that I didn't even know existed until the internet, right?
Now, do you see, this is a tough question because we're in this country here, a lot of different groups and religions and so on, right? Do you see more of these groups here in this country than over in Europe, because the destruction was almost so complete? And whatever people had survived, a lot of them wanted to get out of where they were from because there was no stability.
They are
no
gone.
Security.
In fact, the only thing that's changed is finally, and this did not happen until the last 10 to 15 years, and Greece and Greek people didn't really know the history of Jews. Now there is in area of Salonika and closer to Florina, there's actually finally a museum, but there wasn't. And in fact, years earlier, when I would talk to my father about this, he would say when he took me there, this was the Jewish cemetery. To make amends at some point, a large cross was erected and put there. That is not making amends to the people and community that lived there. And a lot of the homes and areas were ransacked. And my father was able to return to his country. My grandfather was. Many of the siblings were. And I have, can I bring you that or that? No, that picture was too large, but I have a picture on my phone I can show you. There came a time that they had to make a decision to leave, and understand that between 1945 and 49, we now have Greek Civil War.
Yeah, between the communists and
so
the
you
free
finally
side.
get through and you get back. You're expected to serve in the Greek army.
And you have more conflict.
And they just told you were not a real Greek. And that's really the experience that my father had that made him feel like there is nothing here for us.
Can I ask you this question?
Yeah.
I had a student once. She was a foreign exchange student from Berlin. This kid was a great kid. She came to this country. She wanted to learn and see everything that was American. I was going over the Holocaust in class, and I said to her, if you want, you can go up to the library. I know this is a sensitive topic for you. I'm going to show some stuff on the liberation of the camps. And she goes, no, I know what my country did was wrong. And I've been to 2 concentration camps. And Sachsenhausen was one of them, which is right outside of Berlin. Has the Greeks come to kind of, almost apologize for their conduct at this time? So
it's so interesting. The one person who I wish was here to answer that is alive, and is my cousin Victor Pesso. I follow his Facebook page because he frequently travels to Greece. He takes the pictures of the museum, and I listen. And I believe he's in Israel right now visiting. But what's interesting is I think he was born in Greece after the war. Okay, so that's really interesting. He's got a great perspective of that. My father had a very different one that they never did in his lifetime, to answer your question.
Because when he came home,
they did
and
not.
We'll talk about it a little bit later on, that a lot of his own property and items, they were told this isn't yours any longer.
For years, I want to show you, for years, this picture, I used to see it. This is a picture of the picture, but it's very clear. I used to see this and thought, this must have been, I always heard about the Greek butcher shop. They had a butcher shop, so this must be my family. I didn't recognize anybody. I thought maybe this was it. And then later it got explained to me, no, this was the butcher shop, and we couldn't get it back. There were people living in their home. They had a big house. I went and I saw, my father pointed to the house when I went in 86, and it's now like apartments. It's divided up. But their property was taken. It was not given back. Yeah. It wasn't even acknowledged, and it was not talked about.
And they were seen as threats and not citizens.
Yeah, immediately, right. And then immediately thrown on them, you weren't even here. And then we had to defend ourselves from the communists. Well, you sent me to Auschwitz.
Yeah.
You know what? Right.
I was deported.
Correct. Correct. So, my father had a very stern, very unforgiving attitude completely his whole life. He was not a man who was about peace and love. He was not, I think I spoke to you about this. People think, if you have a Holocaust surviving parent, they're like Elie Wiesel. They talk about love, and that is not my experience. My father was clearly, I don't even want to say wounded. It sounds ridiculous. He clearly had been hurt in a way.
The hardship was so deep.
So deep. And his whole persona was about being a survivor and protecting his family. So you said what you had to say. You lied about what you had to lie about, and you never tell anybody where you really come from because they hate us. You are nothing but a Jew to them. And I used to fight with him because I love social studies. Yeah. I love government.
And you were in America.
I wanted to be involved, and I was an American. Yeah. And I grew up mostly in Texas. My gosh, I had 2 years.
The Lone Star State, right?
We had Texas history in 7th grade. Or is it 6th grade? 6th grade. So, I knew about bluebonnets. I would come home singing and reading about Davy Crockett. I think it was all amusing to my father. He's like, yes, we used to wave flags for Greece too, meaning that at any minute,
It could change.
it would change and I was really just Jewish and I needed to not tell anybody.
Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to come back with Renee Pardo for a second part of this segment here on hmTV and the Fog of War and Humanity.